Hi guys, here we are, Unit 6, Biology 2. We are finally done with the skeleton after this. And so we have the last parts, which is the appendicular skeleton, and it is your limbs, so arms and legs, and then also the girdles, or as we think of them, your shoulders and your hips. And these body parts are strictly used for movement, either to move your actual whole body somewhere as you walk, or a movement of your arm to pick things up, or to to touch or do things like that. On our picture there, it has the girdles labeled and has all of the different bones that we are going to talk about for the most part. And so we'll go through them kind of step by step like we always do. Okay, so we're going to start at the top with the pelvic girdle, which is your shoulders. And this is made up of two pairs of two bones each. So 4 total bones in here. You have your 2 clavicles, which we'll talk about first, and then your 2 scapula. So first off, your collarbones. So fancy word for that is clavicles. And they are very slender, kind of S-shaped, that double curved bone, and they go just right across your upper chest, essentially. And so they are attached to your sternum at one end, which we talked about with the different indentions in your sternum, and then they go all the way out to your shoulders. And so shape-wise, they are somewhat, it's described as cone shaped, but if you look at this little if you look at this little end down here, it's kind of hard to see the cone necessarily, but it does have kind of that cone shape. And then it is flattened down here at this lateral end. That's where it is attached out at like the points of your shoulder. So that's the acromial end because of what it's attached to on your scapula. It's smooth on top and ridged underneath. That is where some of the blood vessels run, nerves run, there's muscles attached there. Essentially, all your collarbone does is hold your scapula and your upper limbs, so your upper arms, away from the upper thorax. So they have, kind of stick out and then kind of hang down from there. So really a useful, it has a function to it. It's not a bone that moves. It's not a bone that is really doing much except being an attachment point for other things. It is noted, as I have there on my last little point, it is kind of noted for being one of the more easily fractured bones. Lots of people break their collarbones, and it's again kind of notable in that you can't really do much about it. If you break it, you basically just have to be immobile until it heals. Okay, now the other bone that makes up your pectoral girdle, or your other 2 bones, excuse me, are your shoulder blades. So you have one on either side, of course. This is a thin, somewhat triangular shaped flat bone, and they are on your back. They lay on top of the back of your rib cage, and they are typically, if you're counting the ribs, between ribs 2 and 7. Now with the scapula, it has several different parts and different kind of regions that it is kind of described by. And so the borders and the angles are what I have here. And so you have the 3 borders because it is a triangle, and the superior border is up here just kind of along the top. The medial is parallel to the spine. And so the picture doesn't look like it's totally parallel, so it probably is off a little bit on my picture. But remember, medial means towards the middle, so it is parallel to your spine. And then this lateral forms the other side of your triangle. It is to the outside. A notable function here is that along this lateral side or lateral border, you have little indentation. They don't have it labeled here, but it's right in this little area called the glenoid cavity, and a little fossa. Remember, a fossa is like kind of a little bowl or a little indentation, and that's part of your shoulder joint. So as your humerus comes in, which we'll talk about in a minute, it kind of fits up under and into the lateral side of your scapula. Now, the angles, just so you know, between the borders, you have the superior border, which is, the superior angle, which is labeled right here. between the superior, the top side, and then the inside, the medial. The lateral is between the superior and the lateral side, so it's over here. And then of course the interior, that should be inferior angle, sorry, is between the lateral and the medial, so it's going to be down here. Again, for us, this is not a big deal, but anatomy-wise, some of these points are important if you are looking at where the ribs are underneath, or what muscles are attached, or what other bone, like your humerus, where it is attached in there. Okay, so now as far as features of your scapula, there are a couple that you can be aware of because you can actually feel them. This first is the spine, and this is a ridge that is on the posterior side. If you just put your hand and kind of rub along almost to the tip of your shoulder, you can feel kind of a ridge there, and that is the spine. There's muscle attachment there. It's also structural. It's kind of forming part of the brace along with your clavicle in the front. Then you have the acromion, and this is the kind of the projection on the end of your shoulder, this little thing right here, and it is the point of your shoulder, and so it meets with your clavicle in the front at the acromial end, and it forms the acromial clavicular joint. And so it is not a movable joint, but it does provide some stability and again some muscle attachment for your deltoid muscle and trapezius muscle and some of those. And then you have the coronoid process, which is this little, it's part of that glenoid cavity, this right here, and it projects out, and your biceps actually anchor to it. So your bicep is the muscle on top of your humerus, and so it kind of runs kind of under your arm, the length of it, and attaches to that coronoid process. Okay, so now your upper arm, the bone is called the humerus, and it meets with the scapula, so with your shoulder blade at your shoulder, and then at your elbow it meets with two bones, the radius and the ulna. Anyway, so now structurally there are a couple of things to note. The head of your humerus is what fits up into that glenoid cavity, so it's like your shoulder cavity. It's a ball and socket joint, which we will talk more about different types of joints, which means you have almost a full range of motion in that point. Then you have the anatomical neck, which is where it narrows down underneath the head between the length or the shaft of that long bone. Then the surgical neck, which is, oh yeah, it is labeled on that picture there. This is somewhat below the anatomical neck. It's a weak point in your bone, and it frequently is where you fracture your humerus. And if you look at it, it's pretty far up there. It's going to be much closer to your shoulder than it is to your elbow. Sometimes, again, it depends on the type of fracture, this will require a plate or some kind of extra stability if that bone breaks, and so that's the surgical part comes in. Then at the other end, so down close to your elbow, you have the trochlea, which is right here. They describe this as pulley shaped because it does have kind of a sorry, I never came by hand for kind of this circular shape, this kind of a rotation point with the ulna. And then on the other side, you have where it meets with the radius, kind of a ball shape, because it again fits into, kind of interlocks with the two bones that are below it. So it's typical long bone as far as just the shape, and yeah, there you go. All right, so now the forearm is made of two bones, the radius and the ulna. They meet at your elbow and they meet again at your wrist, and these are the radio-ulnar joints. And in between, they are connected by a membrane called the interosseous membrane. So osseous, that ossy part, or osseous, that refers to bone. Inter, of course, means between. So this is a between bone membrane. Now there are lots of muscles that are surrounding these two bones also, but they do have kind of unique movements in that these bones can kind of twist around each other. Partly that is because one of them is slightly longer than the other. The ulna is the one that runs along the side, like the pinky side of your forearm, and it's a little bit longer, and so it is the one that actually forms the elbow joints. Like if you hit your elbow really hard, you're hitting your ulna, and it has two, and so these are up here at the top. This ulcranon process, which is right up here at the top, and then the coronoid process is right down there below it. These two work, and it's kind of hard to see it, but they have kind of a grip to them, and they grip the trochlea and of your humerus and form a hinge joint that prevents you from hyperextending your elbow. I know some people are much more flexible in that point. That's just different bone structure for other, just genetics basically. But you can't just bend your elbow backwards. That's what what those two bones or those two features help prevent. Then the radius is thinner, closer to the elbow. So here's the radius up here. So this bone is the radius. And so notice it's much thinner up closer to the elbow and then gets much wider as you go down towards the wrist. At the wrist, you have the little styloid process that's labeled right here, and it is where your hand ligaments attach. It is the attachment point for some other muscles, and it is kind of the knob on your wrist that you feel sometimes or that you bump sometimes. That is your radius. Okay, so now your hands. There are 3 different groups of bones in your hands. First off, the wrist bones. Those are the carpus bones, and they are 8 different. They are described as marble shaped, but they're all kind of just random little shaped, called carpals, and they are considered a joint. They have a gliding movement between the bones that helps your wrist kind of turn in all different directions and gives you a very high amount of flexibility for a joint. And these 8 different bones I have listed here. I'm not going to have you memorize them, but I did want you to just see the names, and on the picture that I'll show you on the next page, they are labeled. Then you have the metacarpus bones. These are 5 metacarpals, so they make up the palm of your hand. So from thumb all the way over to your pinky. The first metacarpal is your thumb, and then second, third, fourth, fifth. And they are long bones. Even though they're very small, they still have that typical shape. And the heads of the metacarpals are what form your knuckles. And then the phalanges. The phalanges are your fingers. They are also considered long bones, but teeny tiny ones. And they, again, are numbered, 1 being your thumb and 5 being your pinky. And you have actually 14 small bones that make up your phalanges. Each of your 4 fingers have 3 phalanges. The proximal, which is the bottom, the middle is the middle, and then the distal is the third one. So you've got 12 there. And then your thumb only has 2 phalanges. So the proximal up closer and the distal is the tip of your thumb. So let me show you this picture. So notice how they meet in. So there's your radius down here. Notice how wide it is. It's the majority of your bone. Oh, and I misspoke before. The knob on your wrist is actually a little projection off of your ulna. Sorry, I was thinking of the inside. And then I have the carpals, the 8 carpals are labeled there. Again, for me, you won't need to know those, but you'll know them sometime if you take another anatomy class. And then you have your 5 metacarpals there, the palm of your hand, and then your fingers are the phalanges. And so it's always kind of misleading because you kind of think you just have really long fingers is what it looks like, but just be aware that those metacarpals are there in the middle, right there, and so they form the palm of your hand. They are held together, first of all, just by your skin covering them, but the muscles and tendons and ligaments that are all in there. And then your fingers, your phalanges, are all separated out. Okay, so now the the lower girdle is your pelvic girdle, and this is where your lower limbs are attached to the axial skeleton, to your spine specifically, and it is basically kind of a transmission of the weight from your upper body to your lower body, and so it's kind of a platform for your torso and head. And then it also supports some of your pelvic organs, some of your like your bladder's in there, your reproductive organs, your excretory organs, and so it's kind of just a little holder in there. All right, so the pelvic girdle is made up of the coxal bones. There's two of them. You have two hips, and so they are attached to the sacrum on either side. So that kind of greenish one right there in the middle, of course, is the sacrum, and then the coxal bones are on either side. The coxal bone is formed of 3 separate bones, and by the time you're an adult, which you guys typically or pretty much are, these bones have fused together. Initially, though, again, when you're younger, they're not moving around, they're not sliding around, but they're not quite fused. They're being held together by some cartilage that is slowly ossifying. Okay, so now the 3 parts. You have the ilium. So in this picture, the yellowish part, that is the ilium, and you're looking at it kind of from a side view. And if it helps any, this circle right here in the middle, that's where your femur would fit in. So that's like your hip socket. Okay, so this is the ilium, largest part of the coxal bone. The main part is called the body. So not, super descriptive there. And they have what are called ala, and these are these wing-like structures that actually connect with the sacrum, and so they would attach somewhere back in this region, and they have kind of thick margins on the top. That's this, you can kind of see it kind of double-edged right there. Those are the iliac crest. Those are your hips. So when you put your hands on your hips, that's what you're feeling. And then towards the back, which would actually be what we can see kind of right in here, is the gluteal surface, and that is where your gluteal muscles attach. Those are like that's your rear end. And then the bottom of the ilium forms the top side of the acetabulum, which is your hip socket. It also is where your sciatic notch is. This allows your sciatic nerve, which runs from your lower body up to your spine, where that can run through. Your sciatic nerve is kind of known for causing problems. Runners have issues with their sciatic nerve sometimes. It's one that is not more exposed, but is just is bigger, I guess, in some ways you could say, and so it tends to be a little more obvious when it is hurting. Okay, now we have the ischium, and so on that picture it's the purple region. It is the posterior-inferior part of the coxal bone, so that means it's the back bottom of your coxal bone, and it has kind of an L shape to it. And it joins with the ilium to the top and helps form the sides of the acetabulum, your hip socket. And then this little projection, like the bottom of that L, is called the ramus, and it joins with the pubis, which is going to be the 3rd part of the of the coxal bone. Then you have the ischial tuberosity, and this is the very bottom surface. So it is right down here, this region right here. It's the strongest part. It's wider. It has more kind of it's thicker essentially, and it is the strongest part. It's actually what bears the weight when we sit. And so sometimes, like if you sit on a chair without any padding and your rear starts to hurt, or it feels like, like the bone is, like touching the chair, that's your ischial tuberosity. And then you have another little notch, the lesser sciatic notch, and this allows more nerves and blood vessels to run through. And I don't think that one's labeled on here, but just know it kind of runs along. Here's the greater up here, the lesser is right down there somewhere. Okay, and then the pubis. This is the front part of the coxal bone, and it meets with the pubis of the other coxal bone in the front, and this forms kind of a little horizontal area. This is what your bladder rests on, and the meeting of those two form the pubic crest, and it defines the obturator foramen. Remember, foramen means hole, and this is another passageway for the blood and the nerves to run from lower body up to the upper body. And then again, it forms the bottom and the sides of the acetabulum right here, so that's still part of that hip socket. Okay, so now the lower limbs. So we're almost done with this. The thigh. So your thigh, the bone, of course, is your femur. This is the largest, longest, strongest bone in the human body. Withstands an enormous amount of pressure under the weight of a person, simply walking, but running, jumping, all those activities. This is the bone that takes all of that pressure for the most part. Meets with your hip up closer to your body, and then it meets with the tibia, which is one of your two lower leg bones, at your knee. And they actually run medially, and I'll show you a picture kind of what I mean right there, so that your knees are a little closer to the center of your body. It gives you some balance. So your thighs don't run, or your femurs don't run straight down, they run somewhat at a slant. All right, your femur is typical long bone, so it has the shaft and the two heads on either end. So the actual head of the femur meets with the fovea capitis, and it is has this that's a ligament, or a kind of a little indention, I guess you would say, in the head of your femur. It holds a ligament that connects the femur into the hip socket, the acetabulum. And then the neck, of course, angles somewhat kind of straight, and then it kind of goes in. Again, I'll show you a picture of that. The shaft is the length. And then you have the trochanters, and these are attachments for muscles. The condyles are where it meets with the tibia. The intercondylar notch is between the two condyles, and so this is ligaments run through there. It attaches. It's where your thigh attaches to your shin or your lower leg, and then you have the patellar surface, and this is a smooth area where your patella rests, and typically it's actually the ligaments that your patella is actually embedded in. So here's a picture of this, and so notice in the full skeleton there how the femurs actually run inward a little, or they're kind of slanted inward a little bit. That's what they mean when they say it runs medially towards the middle. But so notice that this, so you have kind of this slight projection outward, that's the lateral, and then this more inward slant. So they're, they form a pretty good, angle here as far as the turn that they take. And so up here, this is where the femur, the head of the femur, fits into the to the hip socket. That fovea capitis, there's a little kind of groove right there. There's a ligament that attaches, and then down towards the bottom you have the condyles. So these condyles are where your femur is meeting up with the tibia, which will be your shin bone. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the patellar surface you can see on this anterior view. That means you're looking at it from the front, so your kneecap kind of fits right in there. Okay, so now lower leg. So this is your tibia and your fibula. You have two bones down there. Just like in your forearm, they're connected by the interosseous membrane. They meet at the knee and they meet at the ankle. And so you have these two joints. They don't have the same flexibility that you see in your forearm. You don't see the rotation, like you can, flip your hand back and forth. You can't do that with your lower leg. Okay, so the tibia is your shin bone. This is the one that, if you run into the coffee table, this is the one that hurts. And it's the weight bearer, and it transmits the weight from the body down to your feet. This is the second largest, strongest, longest bone in the body. It is triangular in cross section, and again, if you've ever, felt along your shin bone, the point of the triangle. That's why it hurts so bad sometimes when you hit it, because it is not a very big spot, and it really can smash your, that thin layer of skin between your bone and whatever you're running into. You have some condyles. Again, this is just like with the femur. This is where they're meeting up. And the distal end, so the ankle end, is very blunt, and there's a projection on it called the medial malleolus. That's your inner ankle bone, and so it sticks out quite a bit. And then the other bone doesn't do a lot, it seems like, as far as things go. It's much smaller, shorter than the tibia. It doesn't bear any weight. It is just for muscle attachment. People break this one fairly frequently. You don't even have to be on crutches usually if you break your fibula, because it doesn't have any, you're not actually putting any weight on it when you step. You still have to wear like a boot and all that kind of stuff. But it is simply muscle attachment. Like, again, lots of muscles crossing over and around and kind of wrapping your ankle up and going up towards your knee. And then it does form your outer ankle bone, your lateral malleolus. And so the ends, again, like I said, meet just like they do at your wrist. Okay, so here is the two lower bones. So the tibia is this much bigger bone. There's the kind of the ridge right there. That is your shin bone. The fibula kind of fits in and kind of behind it. Notice that it does extend down past, and that's where your lateral malleolus is. That's your outer ankle bone. And your medial malleolus is usually a little bit higher. So if you've ever looked, your ankle bones don't match up. And so up here you do have those condyles where the two points on your kind of the two angles or ends of the tibia meet up with your femur. Okay, the foot. So now it's very similar to what we talked about with the hand. You have three kind of segments. The tarsus bones, these are ankle bones, and there's 7 of them. And they are very small in some cases, like they are in your wrist, but you do have 2 that are a little more prominent and that make up your heel, the talus and the calcaneus. These are kind of the back half of your foot, along with the other 5 bones that are in there. And I'll show you a picture again in a minute, and you'll kind of see the difference in size on those. But there are 7 of the tarsal bones. And then your metatarsals, these again make up the length of your foot, essentially, numbered just like they are on the hand. Your big toe is 1, your pinky toe is 5. And the metatarsal, compared to the others, has a much bigger head on those, again, very short but also long bones. And this is the ball of your foot. And so this it goes along obviously with your big toe, but this is the most noticeably different of the metatarsals. And then the phalanges, same word that we used for your fingers, same numbers, much smaller though than what you would see in your hand. Again, you have your 4 toes, and these each have 3 phalanges, very small, but a proximal, middle, and distal bone. And then your big toe, which, if you want to be fancy, you can call your hallux. And again, it just has 2 phalanges, the distal and the proximal. Okay, so here's a picture of a foot. So you're looking at it from above, like looking down at your foot. So here are those 2 big ankle bones, the talus and the calcaneus. So this basically, has removed the tibia and the fibula, but that's what they would meet up with, is those 2 bones as they come down. And then all these other little ones are the tarsals. So those, and then these guys over here. Again, don't worry about knowing the names of those, but just be aware that you have multiple bones in there. They have that same gliding movement. That's why you can rotate your foot around. And then the metatarsal. So notice how metatarsal 1 right here is shorter than the rest of them, but notice the big kind of knob there at the end of that one. That is the ball of your foot. And so it's a stability thing. It is just a feature of your foot that helps with walking and balance. And then your cute little phalanges. So teeny tiny compared to your fingers, but notice that. So these guys all have 3 phalanges, whereas your big toe, your hallux, just has 2. Okay, so I went through it fast, big words. I mixed up a couple of things in there, so listen, because I tried to correct myself. But anyway, as always, if you're listening to this video and you have questions, ask. We'll cover it all in class, so hopefully we'll get it all cleared up. Thanks, guys.